Land of Eem is an OSR tabletop RPG written and designed by Ben Costa and James Parks. It successfully crowdfunded on BackerKit in 2022 and is based on the designer's young adult graphic novels Rickety Stitch, as well as the young adult reader series Dungeoneer Adventures. Although the world that those stories and this RPG share are not affiliated with Dungeons & Dragons, it's essentially a soft, kid-friendly D&D world. In this video, I want to go through a number of things about this game. First, I want to do an unboxing and show you all the physical stuff that comes in the deluxe box set, which you can get from this game's publisher, Exalted Funeral. Then I want to walk you through the core rulebook, which runs 258 pages. I'm only going to gloss over the other two books that come in the box set, the Bestiary Volume 1 and the massive Mucklands Sandbox campaign setting. But I have to say the overall breadth and quality of this game so far is really way above average in the RPG space. I'll cover all those points in this video. Then I want to share with you everything I know about this game's double expansion that will be crowdfunding on Kickstarter. Essentially, they're coming out with a more kid-friendly version of the game and a setting expansion for the original game. Then I want to tell you about my playthrough of the game. I did squeeze out a few insights about the game's design by running the sample adventure at the end of the core rulebook. And finally, I want to give you my remaining pros and cons of this game after all is said and done. But before we jump into the unboxing, I want to point out the most glaring and surprising feature of this game, which you may or may not intuit from looking at the cover or the cute meeples or the interior artwork, and that's the fact that this game is really not for kids. And by kids, I mean elementary school age. I think by the time a kid is about 12 or 13, they could grasp this game's rules and run with them. And to be fair to the publishers and creators, it says right there on the box and the back of each book that this game is for 12 and up. But really, it's for 12 and up, because it's essentially a full-blown old-school Renaissance RPG, a sort of modern take on D&D BX. But with all that being said, it's actually one of the best designed retro clones I've ever come across. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's see what's in the deluxe box. First of all, this thing is heavy. It feels like 25 or 30 pounds or so. The slipcase features some nice art on the front and back, as well as gold foil. My slipcase box did get a little damaged on the top. There's a 50-50 chance that I did that myself when handling the product. It may have slipped out of my hand. If yours arrives damaged, I'm sure the publisher, Exalted Funeral, would make you whole. They're a solid company. There are 3 books here, a slim box with some accessories, a very thick map, and a GM screen. Let's start with the first book, the core rulebook. This is a 268-page hardback. The cover has a matte finish. There's a blue ribbon bookmark. The end papers have some very useful quick reference tables. The book has heavy, semi-glossy interior pages and is stitch bound, which means the book's pages will lay flat quite nicely. The print job on the inside is about as good as you could ask for. Crisp, vibrant colors. I'm actually going to walk you through the digital version of this book, but here I just wanted to show you the quality of the physical product. The next book in the stack is the Bestiary, Volume 1, and this runs exactly 200 pages. It's got 190 creatures, critters, and creepers. Those are technical terms, I'm not just being cute. There's a red ribbon bookmark, and more really useful end papers for the GM. One thing I did notice about this bestiary was that it includes the 26 adversaries from the core rulebook, so you do have a bit of redundancy there. The core book could have been 30 pages shorter because of that fact, but then again, it's nice that they included a handful of enemies in the core rulebook just in case the GM doesn't yet own this bestiary. I'm not really going to cover this book in this video beyond leafing through it here, but as you can see, they illustrated every single creature, which is a rare and welcome feature in a bestiary. The production value of this game is really pretty extraordinary. The third and final book in the box is the Mucklands Sandbox campaign setting. This tome is 430 pages and covers hundreds of locations on the Mucklands hex map, a map which you can freely download digitally from the Land of Eem website. In terms of layout and readability, this is by far the most attractive hex crawl book I've come across. Every single hex has all these unique features, and the sheer number of illustrations that brings the NPCs to life is remarkable. I think the only way this was possible was because the chief creators of this game are talented and industrious graphic novel artists. So they just had the willpower and the work ethic to rip out hundreds and hundreds of illustrations for this hex map book. Now you can tell that a lot of these portraits are uncolored sketches, but still, they're each really charming and unique. I'm not sure how long it would take to fully explore the Mucklands. It's possible that you could never really cover it all, but that just adds to the replayability of this sandbox. The next thing in the box is this slim box that contains a little reminder to pick up the Dungeoneer Adventures books and some very interesting dice. These are light blue, and inside of each one is a little metal or plastic skull. It's really hard to make out the details of the skull, but the idea is that each of these dice is a slime that has digested a skull, in reference of course to the graphic novel Rickety Stitch and the Gelatinous Goo. This slim box is mostly empty and acts as a rolling tray. You get a handful of wooden meeples, double-sided. They each represent a playable species in the game, although they really only scratch the surface in terms of the number of species you can play as in this game. I think they're meant more as symbolic tokens on the hex map. The next thing in the box is an ultra-thick board game style board that contains the Mucklands hex map. Hundreds of hexes to explore. In the game's rules, you can cover 1 or 2 hexes per day in-game, so it would take weeks and weeks to really traverse all this land. Finally, there is the GM screen, which is 3 panels. It has some really cool artwork on the front. The back is loaded with GM tables and rules references, as you might expect. Overall, the box set is a bit of a treasure trove of playable content. The weight of it is a bit ridiculous, even just the Mucklands campaign book, so I'm not sure how well this thing would travel. But if you're running the game at your own place and you don't have to move this thing around, it's great. Also, if you have a niece or nephew in middle school or maybe high school who you want to really impress with a gift, this box set would blow their socks off. Alright, let's get into the core rulebook here. As I mentioned, this is really an OSR RPG, composed of a sort of freshly chopped D&D 1E and 5E mixed together. But there are some unique innovations too. Probably the most prominent one is the fact that for any skill check, you're rolling a d12 rather than a d20. Also, taking a page out of the Powered by the Apocalypse philosophy, there are gradations of success and failure along a static matrix of 1 through 12. As in, this table by far has more impact on the play experience than any other table in the book. Ultimately, it not only means that each roll of the dice results in something more interesting to the player, but also that the GM really needs to be pretty creative and good at improvising subtle variations of an outcome. There are modifiers to a roll, of course. There's a cap of +3 or -3 to any check, plus 1 from a meta currency called a quest point. Drawing from 5e, you have advantage and disadvantage, where you roll the d12 twice and take the better or worse result, respectively, and proficiencies, where certain checks or circumstances in the fiction benefit from a permanent advantage roll. There are also PC deficiencies, where it's always a disadvantaged roll. Some abilities and situations will actually have a target number to meet or exceed, rather than use the core results table. So you do have an interesting mix between 2 different resolution mechanics. There are 4 core attributes that range from +2 to -2. Vim, which is like your charisma and intuition, Vigor, your physicality, Knack, your cunning and dexterity, and Know-how, which is your knowledge and wisdom. Additionally, there are 5 stats. Courage, which is essentially your HP in this game. Attack, which is equal to your vigor and is added to your d12 attack roll. Defense, which is derived by inverting your knack attribute. A negative defense is better because it reduces an incoming attack. Quest points, as mentioned, are the game's meta currency. They get refreshed at the start of each session. And inventory slots, which tell you how much you can carry and where before becoming overburdened. There are 20 skills, and you can improve these by spending XP, but they can never be more than +3 or less than -3. The organization of 20 skills across 4 core attributes actually reminds me very much of Free League's Year Zero engine, so we can throw that onto the pile of possible inspirations for this game's design. Finally, your character has special abilities. You start off with a few from your class and your folk or race, and you might pick up some from magical items. Each class has a unique menu of abilities that you can spend XP on as you level up to the maximum level of 10. And the creators very thoughtfully made a printable sheet for each class so that you can refer to your abilities and plan on which ones you want to buy next. As far as classes, there are 6 in the core rulebook. A few of them seem pretty standard for a D&D-ish setting, such as the Bard, Knight Errant, which is like a knight or fighter, and the Rascal, which is a rogue stand-in. But then you have the Dungeoneer, which seems a bit generic and specific at the same time, and the Loyal Chum, whose abilities are really all based on social and combat support. That one's a real soft touch. And finally, the most intriguing of all, the Gnome. If you recall, the earliest versions of D&D featured race as class, with the elves, halflings, and dwarves, so this is truly old school. I think these days you're supposed to be super offended by this with all the biological determinism and whatnot, but the book stipulates that you can mix and match all these different race features and bonuses however you want, so they covered their bases there. As far as experience points goes, again, here's another nod to the Year Zero engine, and I don't know, maybe there were some games that used this approach before Free League, but basically, if you do certain things in the session, you unlock 1 XP each for a total of 15 possible points earned at the end of a session. You spend those points to level up your character, which can unlock new class abilities. You can also dump points into improving one of your 20 skills, or take one of these stat boosts once each per character arc. I think the single most entertaining and interesting aspect of character creation is the sheer number of folk you can choose from. In this initial setting, which is called the Mucklands, boggarts are actually the most common people of the land, and humans are rare. Human kingdoms fell so long ago that nobody remembers them, and you can play as a gnome, of course, or a goblin, or a boggle, which is like a different kind of goblin, or a bugbear. But there's also the possibility of playing as a shrew-like inventor species, a psychic mushroom folk, a whale person, bird person, frog dude, and my personal favorites, a skeleton or a gelatinous goo. Now, as much as I love the notion of a playable goo, it does stipulate here in the rulebook that goos can't speak the common tongue. They only speak gelatinous gooese. You might be able to squeeze out a couple of laughs at the table with this, but this could quickly become a drag for everyone if a party member can't really communicate verbally with everyone else. I mean, they tried this in Star Trek Prodigy with Murph, and honestly, Murph was just kind of annoying after a while. Anyway, each of these folks comes with 3 perks and 2 quirks. I don't really understand how you can mix and match most of these, to be honest. Most of the time, they're pretty biologically specific. Okay, here's where it really dawned on me that this game is really not for elementary school age kids. There are all these old school D&D style rules for armor types and their features when used in combat. These rules are fine, they're great, and I welcome this level of detail, but good luck getting a second grader to care about any of this. As far as how money is spent in this game, I'm not entirely sure I like it. Instead of tracking individual counts of copper, silver, gold, and ancient coins, you instead employ usage dice, which represent pouches of each of these denominations of coins, and on a low roll, those pouches are depleted. This all just seems a tad too abstract for me. As far as mundane items that you can find or shop for, I do have to say I was pretty impressed with the D400 table that is provided. D400 is pretty big. It's not likely that you're going to get the same item twice if you're rolling randomly. Magnificent items, on the other hand, are meant to be much fewer in number, but carry with them a special ability or perk. I really appreciate how they give you those special features organized by weapon and item type, and you compare these features with any mundane item. So with just these 2 pages, you can quickly construct tens of thousands of possible magic items. I don't want to get too into the weeds with the crafting system in this game, but the creators really wanted to make it a fleshed out aspect of the play experience. First, it should be noted that materials for crafting take up very little of your inventory. This is an abstraction which encourages players to gather up as many crafting materials as they can. There are over 200 components to collect in the Mucklands realm, divided into the categories of beast, elemental, fish, and herb. You have to spend precious travel turns to gather these components, and these tables determine what your wilderness skill check will yield. Long story short here, there are tons of components that you can gather, and each of them has a lot of information associated with it. Just imagine for a second if each party member went foraging for crafting components on a single travel turn, and they each scored 6 components. They would all have to write down 6 entries from these tables onto their sheets of paper. That's a bit of an arduous task, especially when you consider that a character might amass dozens or hundreds of components over time. I've seen tabletop RPGs try to do this before. Ultimately, I think you really need an app, or at the very least a spreadsheet, to keep track of all this stuff. I like the notion of crafting in a game, but it's always so much more effortless when it's in a video game format. Pencil and paper crafting systems just don't seem like a ton of fun. And trying to get little school-age kids to mess around with this, forget about it. Anyway, this game does have some robust hex crawl exploration rules. Traveling and camping will invariably result in combats and lost supplies and things like that. You can ride on mounts, but they have to be fed and rested every day. There are fiddly little rules for all that stuff. I couldn't find almost any special rules for dungeon delving other than a couple of rules about torches or other light sources. I noticed an easy mode rules variation for keeping track of food, and it made me think this whole book could have been filled with little easy mode rules that might have made this game as kid-friendly as the art suggests that it is, but we'll actually get to that in a minute. They're working on a solution. The only thing I'll say about the conflict system is that I love how they break it down into 4 phases, and the first 3 of those phases address non-combat solutions. Phase 1 is actually to talk and negotiate with the enemy. The second is to improvise a solution that is not combat. The third is to run, and only when you get to the 4th phase do you actually resort to combat. This is great. This is not just a kid-friendly thing. This is actually good game design, because a constant, unending chain of combat encounters is frankly boring. Of the 20 or so adversaries offered in the core rulebook, about a third of them have social descriptions and discussions of how they behave when winning or losing. There are about 65 pages of GM advice and tables, more tables than average for a core rulebook, I'd say. I think this game could almost stand alone as just this one book, but you might need the bestiary if you want to expand beyond the 20 monsters in this one. But in terms of places to discover and items to find, the core rulebook is just loaded with content. So that brings me to the upcoming expansion that the creators have planned. This campaign, which just launched at the time of recording, is made up of 2 parts. The first is Land of Eem Dungeoneer Adventures, which is a new RPG based on Land of Eem and its setting, but with simpler rules. So basically, I wasn't the only one wanting Land of Eem to be a bit simpler. It looks like they are answering the call and making that a reality. In this game, players are students of the so-called Dungeoneer Academy, a school where kids train to become adventurers and explorers in the Land of Eem. This is a direct offshoot of Ben Costa and James Parks' chapter book series of the same name. I can't really say much more about this particular RPG other than I'm glad that it's coming into existence, and I look forward to reading where the rules land in terms of complexity. The second part of this crowdfund campaign is the Underlands Sandbox campaign setting, which is an expansion for the original Land of Eem RPG. This campaign takes you to a subterranean realm with 100 plus locations, 300 plus illustrated NPCs, 40 or more new monsters, and factions and tables and quests. If this campaign ends up anything like the first one they published with the Mucklands, then it's going to be a lavish hex map with 400 plus page campaign book. It's a pretty exciting prospect if you've bought into this game and its setting and you're hoping for more to explore. So I wanted to share with you some more detailed observations and insights about this game after I ran a session using the sample adventure at the end of the core rulebook. Some good, some bad, some neutral, more or less. The conflict phases are built to think beyond combat, and it works. If you recall, there are 4 phases to any given conflict: parlay, improvise, run, and then combat. If you actually play the game properly and present those first 3 phases as options, complete with potential dice rolls and just space in the fiction to discuss those things, then the players will think about solving problems outside of combat. And this is the antidote, in my opinion, to the combat-centric Dungeons & Dragons way of playing RPGs, where combat encounters are strung end to end and eat up most of a session. My players ended up defeating or bypassing more than half the monsters in creative ways that didn't involve trading blows until one side was dead. It was great. It really is a bit fiddly with the modifiers. This is not much of a surprise, but honestly the artwork kept signaling to me that this is a deeply simplified rule set, but when the rubber hit the road and I had to tally up all the modifiers for each attack, it felt almost exactly like any retro clone. To be fair, you get better at it over time as a GM, and it goes fast after a while. But yeah, for the millionth time, this isn't a little kid's game. Class abilities are extremely generous. I only glossed over them on my first reading, but if you look at the class abilities more closely, 2 of which you start with and which you can buy with XP as you level up, they're quite generous to players. It's places in the game like these where you can see the designers wanting to bend a normal retro clone towards a younger playgroup. These reality bending blank check abilities are the kinds of things you see all the time in more kid-oriented games. It is a bit jarring when you pair these kinds of narrative-first abilities with things like encumbrance rules and 4 layers of hit modifiers. D12 yields more crit, success, and failure. I find it refreshing to roll the D12 rather than the D20 over and over, but one thing that becomes immediately clear is that the smaller denomination die is going to yield a critical miss and a critical hit much more frequently. This, of course, makes for swingier skill checks and combats, but I have to assume that was the intent. Mixed roll results can be a challenge in combat for DMs. As much as I love the hard and fast table of dice results that most of this game is based on, it does take some practice as the GM to interpret the mixed results. The actual mixed results suggested by the authors for combat can be a bit cumbersome to generate and track on the fly. Tracking inventory needs its own formatted sheet. This is not a Land of Eem problem, but rather a perpetual issue with many RPGs, and that's that the character sheet does not really provide enough space to track inventory and gear comfortably. I think the ideal here, especially with a game that wants you to track encumbrance, is to provide players with a completely separate sheet that has some special formatting to help sort the items and the encumbrance mechanic. Or in the alternative, just use a blank sheet of lined paper. If you're playing this game with the digital version of the character sheet, it's a completely moot point. Alright, so here are my overall thoughts about Land of Eem. Cons: too complex for little kids. Even though the box in the back of every book clearly says the game is for players age 12 and up, you just keep getting the sense from the artwork and the presentation that younger kids could play it. And they kinda can, but you have to shave off a lot of the mechanics. At least there's a kid-friendlier version coming out soon. I've got high hopes. Crafting is a pass for me. I don't know if I'm lazy or impatient or what, but I just don't want to find myself filling sheets full of lists of components and their features, or waiting on players to do the same, and then sifting through those lists to see if we have the right components to fill a recipe or blueprint for a craftable item. I either need a web app or a well-designed spreadsheet or something to circumvent all that manual bookkeeping. Abstract money system. I think the designers wanted to simplify the money system by implementing usage dice for spending instead of specific coin counts, but this abstraction just doesn't vibe with me. I almost think it's just more satisfying and just as simple to have coin counts rather than these quantum pouches of different denominations. Pros: artwork and layout. I want to acknowledge the actual game design in a sec, but I have to say first and foremost that one of the most remarkable features of Land of Eem is its many colorful, charming, and consistent illustrations. Really, the covers, the GM screen, landscape, and the hundreds of character illustrations all speak for themselves. Those, combined with a very professional layout and book organization across the 3 core books, creates an almost bewitching magnetism. It's just visually a very appealing product. Fresh OSR design. Let's face it, the most important thing here is the game design, not the pretty pictures. I think the mishmash of old D&D, 5th edition, and Year Zero engine really does work to make something greater than the sum of its parts. In particular, I like how the roll of a D12 is constantly giving you 5 different possible outcomes. This is a little taxing on a GM who is used to binary outcomes, but it really doesn't take long to get used to this paradigm, and it's just infinitely more interesting for the players. Combat avoidant conflicts. I really like how the first 4 phases of a conflict have to do with not entering combat. This is a foundational design meant to train players to think outside of the norm of solving everything with violence, and it justifies all the non-combat skills and abilities that the game features. Playable folk. I am normally not a fan of what I call zoo settings, where there are dozens of different playable races, but when it comes to what is essentially a kids RPG, variety is actually welcome, not just by me, but by the kids who are playing the game. In my one run of the game, it was mushrooms and goos that were the biggest hit. Graphic novels to reinforce the setting. In preparation for this review, I picked up all 3 Dungeoneer Adventure chapter books and a couple of the Rickety Stitch graphic novels. First of all, it's just nice to have media reinforcing an RPG setting. I'm not saying that these books are as the Silmarillion is to the One Ring, but there really is a persistent world here. And if you are curious about getting these books, I've left links down below. As far as the reading level, it's listed as age 8 to 12 for the Dungeoneer adventures, and that's pretty accurate, I think. Rickety Stitch doesn't have an age recommendation, but it's about the same. I guess in the end, I've just gotten kind of sucked into this whole product line. There's something about the friendly artwork combined with genuine understanding of old school D&D mixed with modern design sensibilities that all just really appeals to me. I look forward to playing this game a lot more and picking up the expansions when they're released. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this game, as well as the upcoming expansions and the graphic novels if you've read them. I've left links for everything below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.